Return to the Jurassic era. How modern genetic research is changing our perception of dinosaurs. Get ready for a shock. Science is breaking all the rules. Yesterday it was fiction, but today it's reality. We saw how a goat started producing milk with real spider silk, stronger than steel. And then scientists created an entire army of glowing cats, straight out of a movie. These incredible genetic experiments are changing the world right now. But here's the craziest part. These breakthroughs are leading us directly to resurrecting dinosaurs. You'll definitely want to know how that's possible, so make sure to watch until the end.
All these amazing discoveries in recent years clearly show one thing: genetic engineering, which not long ago felt like science fiction, is now advancing at an incredibly fast, exponential rate. It is this swift progress that leads to such astounding scientific leaps, which are changing our understanding of what's possible. And it is here, against this backdrop of genetic marvels, that I, a person captivated by the grandeur and mystery of dinosaurs since early childhood, couldn't help but ponder the famous idea of their genetic resurrection. The first Jurassic Park immediately came to mind, a film that didn't just entertain, but truly altered the worldview of entire generations. This iconic film, without exaggeration, inspired millions of people worldwide. Its influence is still felt today. Some, fascinated by the anatomy and physiology of dinosaurs, later chose careers as doctors or veterinarians. Others, inspired by their incredible forms and images, became artists whose first masterpieces were, of course, the great reptiles. And some, perhaps most ironically, became interested in genetics itself, realizing its potential through the story of resurrecting ancient giants. It was then, 26 years ago, on the big screen, that I was first shown not just living dinosaurs, but the very possibility of their resurrection. For me, it became the embodiment of a cherished dream, and honestly, who among us hasn't dreamed of seeing these majestic creatures in person?
However, there's a huge but. Dinosaurs are animals that died out approximately 65 million years ago. This time span is so immense that it's incredibly difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. Just imagine, modern humanity has existed on Earth for only about 2.5 million years. Dinosaurs, on the other hand, reigned on our planet for a staggering 160 million years. Jurassic Park offered us a seemingly impossible and fantastical way to resurrect them. But it's worth remembering that once, even ordinary smartphones seemed like something on the verge of fantasy. And now they're an indispensable part of our daily lives. So, could something similar happen with the revival of dinosaurs, considering the modern genetic technologies that have advanced at an unimaginable rate over the last 2 decades? That's precisely what we're going to explore now. Very recently, the global scientific community took an important step. Specialists were able to determine the general genomic structure of dinosaurs. A genomic structure is essentially the arrangement of genes on chromosomes, unique to each species. While even animals of the same species will have varying DNA sequences, the overall genome architecture remains characteristic of that species. Does this mean that scientists have already extracted intact dinosaur DNA and are now preparing to bring them back to life? Unfortunately, not yet. And there are several significant reasons why. As Jurassic Park showed us, dinosaur DNA was supposedly taken from a mosquito preserved in amber. And surprisingly, in reality, we have indeed found prehistoric mosquitoes that likely contain dinosaur blood. However, to the great disappointment of paleontologists and geneticists, the DNA contained within these samples has long since and irrevocably degraded over millions of years. Even if we could miraculously extract dinosaur DNA, it would be fragmented into countless microscopic pieces, into millions of tiny bits. Moreover, we would have virtually no clues as to how these pieces should be arranged in the correct order to form a complete genome. Imagine a gigantic jigsaw puzzle with thousands of pieces, but you have neither the picture you're supposed to assemble, nor even the certainty that all the pieces are there. Maybe a few dozen are missing, or perhaps thousands. The same problem arises with degraded DNA. In the movie, scientists tried to fill in these missing fragments of the genetic puzzle with frog genes. But I must point out, using frog DNA would hardly result in a dinosaur. It would be far more logical and biologically sound to use bird DNA, as they're the closest living relatives of dinosaurs. Yet even this approach is unlikely to yield the desired outcome.
But let's allow ourselves a moment of fantasy and imagine that by some miracle we possessed a complete intact strand of Tyrannosaurus DNA. If you believe this would be enough to bring it back to life, you are deeply mistaken. You can't just hand a geneticist a DNA strand and say, "Here, you can recreate an entire dinosaur." No, it's much more complex. DNA is merely a blueprint, a starting point. The development of a complex animal from a single cell within an egg is an incredibly intricate and delicate dance of genes, which must be activated and deactivated at precisely the right time, in the correct sequence, under the influence of a series of complex environmental and biochemical signals. In other words, you need not just DNA, but a perfect dinosaur egg, with all the complex internal chemistry, nutrients, and subtle regulatory mechanisms contained within it. In the book version of Jurassic Park, scientists created artificial eggs, while in the films they used ostrich eggs. It's important to note that neither of these methods would work in reality. You cannot simply place chicken DNA into an ostrich egg and get a chicken. Such experiments, incidentally, have already been conducted and proved unsuccessful. The same applies to any other dinosaur. Thus, it becomes clear that by direct means, as depicted in the movies, we cannot yet resurrect dinosaurs. However, science always seeks alternative routes, and fortunately there are other methods. Jack Horner, a distinguished American paleontologist who incidentally served as a consultant for Jurassic Park, has dedicated his life to the dream of having a pet dinosaur. He has always maintained that if you want to find dinosaur DNA, you must look for it within the dinosaur remains themselves. In 1993, he had a unique opportunity to extract DNA from a Tyrannosaurus sample. And while he didn't find the DNA itself, he discovered something equally astonishing: red blood cells, which are the biological basis of hemoglobin, inside the bones. Later, during a large-scale project in the Hell Creek Formation, his team uncovered T-Rex bones from which, using special acids, they were able to identify blood vessels and then osteocytes, bone cells. Further traces of proteins, including collagen, were found, which was an incredible breakthrough for science. But even after all these advances, the main goal remained elusive: complete, undamaged Tyrannosaurus DNA. It was then finally understood that DNA degrades at an astonishingly high rate, and therefore it's physically impossible to achieve what was depicted in the film. But, on the other hand, perhaps dinosaurs never truly went extinct in the absolute sense. On the contrary, they are in a way still among us. I'm talking about birds. It's important to understand that birds didn't just evolve from dinosaurs, or are merely their close relatives. No, it's much deeper than that. Birds are dinosaurs. They represent the surviving lineage of avian dinosaurs. Of course, this isn't what most people want to hear. We crave to see colossal Indominus rexes or toothy velociraptors. But scientists strive for scientific truth. And that truth is that under the right conditions, we could potentially use modern birds to resurrect certain extinct species, like the dodo. But we all understand that we're not interested in avian dinosaurs. We want the Triceratops, Allosaurs and Spinosaurus, and many others that once majestically roamed our planet, making it tremble beneath their strides. And this is where Jack Horner proposes one of the most intriguing and potentially realistic ways to revive dinosaurs: by transforming modern birds. This operation could be called evolutionary rollback or reverse engineering. Jack Horner suggests utilizing several evolutionary mechanisms, which he terms means of biological modification. What are these tools? Allow me to explain with examples. One such tool is selection. We all know what that is: the deliberate improvement of plant varieties or animal breeds, as well as the creation of new ones through controlled breeding. The result of centuries of selection can be your cute pet pug or the plump tomatoes growing in your garden. We have actively used this method for thousands of years.
Next comes transgenesis. This is a more modern technique where a gene from one animal is isolated and inserted into the genome of another animal. We've already provided examples: glowing cats that received a fluorescence gene, or the goat that produces spider silk. This is a targeted genetic modification to endow an organism with new properties. And finally, we need what's called the activation of atavism. Atavism is the reappearance in an individual of traits characteristic of its distant ancestors, but absent in most modern members of the species. For instance, sometimes children are born with rudimentary tails, as our distant ancestors had tails. There are documented cases of snakes born with underdeveloped limbs, or most interestingly, a chicken with teeth. Let's delve into this point in more detail. A scientist named Matthew Harris found a way to stimulate the gene responsible for tooth formation in chickens. By doing so, he was able to activate a dormant tooth gene and breed chickens that had actual teeth. This is incredible, and it means that if we can identify the right genes, we can activate or deactivate them in a developing embryo to alter its morphology. But this is just the beginning. Many questions remain, for instance, about bird wings, which look nothing like the forelimbs of Archaeopteryx, one of the most famous transitional species between dinosaurs and birds. However, if we carefully examine chicken embryos at different developmental stages, we can observe that their forelimbs at a certain point look almost identical to the forelimbs of Archaeopteryx. But during further development, under the influence of specific genes, these limbs fuse and transform into wings. And herein lies the key. If we can identify the gene responsible for this fusion and switch it off at the right moment, we could theoretically obtain a bird with limbs resembling those of a dinosaur, or if you prefer, those of Archaeopteryx. The exact same story applies to tails. A bird embryo during its early developmental stages possesses a relatively long tail. But again, due to the action of a specific gene, this tail becomes reduced and eventually disappears. By manipulating these genes, humans could quite possibly create a chicken with a full long tail, just like a dinosaur. And if we combine all these manipulations, creating a toothed chicken with dinosaur-like limbs and a tail, we would get a creature that would astonishingly resemble a dinosaur. Yes, for decades, we couldn't even get close to recreating dinosaurs, and now, here's a real chance. This is precisely what Jack Horner and his colleagues are working on with their chickenosaurus project. Many might dismiss this as mere fancy, claiming it's not a real dinosaur, but these are just the basic, fundamental aspects of their work. However, this approach already appears far more plausible and scientifically grounded than the idea of extracting DNA from a mosquito trapped in amber. And this brings us much, much closer to dinosaurs. By manipulating genes, by switching them on and off during the embryonic stage, we can potentially roll back evolution and, in theory, create a real dinosaur. So to answer the question, will we ever be able to recreate dinosaurs?
My answer is unequivocal, yes. The much more interesting and intriguing question is, when will they be revived, and will we live to see them? Because there are a vast number of factors that could slow down both the actual revival of dinosaurs and the further development of genetic engineering. And one of the most significant and challenging obstacles is, paradoxically, ethics. Modern moral standards and ethical norms play a colossal role in regulating scientific research, especially when it comes to interfering with life and nature itself. If you had been subscribed to me, you would have known these facts.